Three landlocked African nations just unlocked the Atlantic Ocean, and no one saw it coming. But what kind of deal is so powerful it can erase geography, outsmart sanctions, and terrify old empires all at once? Let's find out. For decades, geography was the excuse used to keep Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger economically dependent, politically quiet, and strategically cornered. Being landlocked was more than just a geographical fact. It was a geopolitical sentence. Without a coastline, these nations were told to accept limited ambitions. Trade would always depend on neighbors. Growth would always hinge on approval from regional powers. And sovereignty, it would always be conditional. But what if being landlocked wasn't the actual problem? What if the real issue was the system designed around that geography? A system built by those who profited from choke points, bottlenecks, and artificial gatekeeping. That's the question Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger began asking in the aftermath of their joint departure from ECOWAS in 2023. The world fixated on the idea that these nations had lost their access to trade and legitimacy. But quietly, something else was taking shape, a strategic reassessment of the map itself. These weren't weak states flailing for lifelines. These were sovereign actors recalculating their position, not within ECOWAS or France's old colonial framework, but within a new African equation where survival required creativity and unity. For AES, the challenge was clear. How do you break free from a system that punishes independence with isolation? The solution had to be more than reactionary. It had to be structural. And that began with rejecting the narrative that landlocked means powerless. The logic of the old world, the colonial, post-colonial, and neo-colonial systems, is based on control of access. Ports, pipelines, and borders are held like leashes. If a government steps out of line, economic pressure closes in, aid is withheld, transit is blocked. Sanctions have become the modern siege. The Sahel knows this firsthand. Each of the AES nations has seen trade weaponized against them, not by natural forces, but by political decisions made behind closed doors. That's where Morocco comes in. Its initiative wasn't just welcome, it was essential. Not because Morocco offered something that didn't exist, but because it helped AES build something that was intentionally denied, a route around the blockade. A corridor where decisions aren't subject to ECOWAS retaliation, to Western disapproval, or to diplomatic blackmail. Before the deal, each of these countries relied on neighboring ECOWAS members to access ports. Mali through Senegal, Niger through Benin, Burkina Faso through Côte d'Ivoire. But what happens when all those countries close their borders overnight, not for national security, but to punish political disobedience? You get a silent war, not of bullets, but of silence at the docks, empty trucks at the borders, and stalled economies. And yet, that silent war created something else too, necessity. And necessity, as always, led to invention. This was the moment AES leaders stopped asking, how do we survive without ECOWAS? And started asking, why were we ever forced to rely on them in the first place? The Morocco route is not just geographic, it's philosophical. It is a rejection of dependency as destiny. The very idea that a country's economic fate should depend on whether or not a foreign-backed president wins the next election in a neighboring state is itself absurd. AES saw through that absurdity and began to build around it. What Morocco understood, and what made the offer so attractive, was that the Sahel didn't need pity, loans, or lectures. It needed a partner with ports, leverage, and vision. Morocco had all three. But crucially, this wasn't a handout. The decision to accept Moroccan partnership came after months of internal AES consultations. Not just in foreign ministries, but among economists, trade experts, and military leaders trying to understand the long game. This was not desperation. It was designed. By the time the foreign ministers of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger touched down in Rabat in April 2025, the decision was already made. The endorsement was not a plea. It was a statement of confidence in a new model, one that bypasses inherited barriers and replaces imposed weakness with negotiated strength. And here's where the stakes get even higher. Once you turn geography from a prison into a weapon of your own, you change not just your trade routes, you change your role on the continent. You begin to influence who others trade with. You set examples that others may follow. You open up new possibilities not just for goods, but for ideas, alliances, and resistance. Because when you break out of the cage, you don't just walk away, you teach others how to bend the bars. And that's why this move didn't just solve a logistics problem. It sparked something bigger, something that made the entire region look up and ask, if they can trade without the West, what else can they do without it? When Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger found a way around their dependency on ECOWAS ports, the move didn't just shock the region, it blew a hole through the very logic that kept the West African order intact for decades. Because what is ECOWAS, really, without control over borders, pipelines, and ports? In theory, it's a regional bloc meant to promote cooperation. In practice, for the last 2 decades, ECOWAS functioned more like a doorman to West Africa's wealth, controlling who could enter, who could leave, and who had to wait outside. It offered trade access as a reward for political obedience. It closed corridors as punishment. It enforced sanctions not as a last resort, but as a first weapon when anyone dared think independently. The AES Morocco Sea deal didn't just embarrass ECOWAS. It exposed how little leverage ECOWAS has when geography stops being a threat and starts being optional. Burkina Faso no longer needs to beg for a fuel corridor through Ghana. Niger no longer has to fear sudden border blockades by Benin. Mali is no longer hostage to Dakar's political mood swings. This is more than a workaround. It's a redistribution of power. Because here's the real problem the world doesn't want to talk about. ECO was never adapted to a post-colonial world. Its decisions are still heavily shaped by Paris. Its priorities are skewed toward pleasing Western investors, not defending member sovereignty. And when France panicked about losing influence in the Sahel, ECOWAS responded like a loyal servant, not like a bloc of African nations. The sanctions ECOWAS imposed after the 2023 military takeovers weren't about restoring democracy. They were about restoring obedience. And that obedience revolved around one thing: access. Close the ports, choke the trade, break the spirit. But instead of folding, AES built a back door. And that back door is now wide open, leading to Moroccan docks, international waters, and partnerships that don't involve bending the knee to anyone. And suddenly, ECOWAS is facing a question it's never had to answer. What do you do when your biggest threat isn't internal rebellion, but irrelevance? It's not just ECOWAS that feels it. The ripple effects are reaching coastal countries too. Togo is realizing that its trade monopoly over landlocked neighbors has just collapsed. Benin is watching Niger export goods without a single truck crossing its soil. Senegal is learning that the port of Dakar is no longer the only gateway Mali needs. This is not a theory. This is a live restructuring of West Africa's entire trade architecture. And trade is only the beginning, because trade brings leverage. Leverage brings alliances, and alliances shift power. Already, BRICS nations like Russia, China, and India are eyeing the Morocco AES corridor as a direct entry point into West African markets. With sea access no longer tied to Western allies, AES can negotiate from strength, not desperation. Want to sell gold to Shanghai? Do it through Dakhla. Want to import grain from Brazil? Ship it straight to Morocco? Want to bypass IMF loan conditions and still build roads, schools, and defense systems? Now you have options. In economic terms, this means diversification of partners. In political terms, it means independence of policy. And what's more dangerous to a system built on dependency than nations making decisions without asking permission? Let's also not forget the psychological shift. The people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are no longer told they're poor because they lack a coast. They now see, in real time, that it was never about the coast. It was about who controlled access to it. This is narrative warfare. And AES just won a major battle. That's why this deal scared so many foreign ministries across the continent and beyond. Because if 3 of the poorest, most sanctioned, most geographically cursed countries in Africa can build a new trade corridor and redraw the map, then who's next? Chad? Central African Republic? South Sudan? Once one group escapes the net, the others stop fearing the fishermen. And now ECOWAS, France, and all the approved partners of West Africa are left asking, if they don't need us for port, will they need us for anything else? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Now the question is, what reaction came after this deal? Every empire has pressure points. The day AES secured ocean access through Morocco, it didn't just reroute trade, it pressed hard on those pressure points. And nowhere did the alarm bells ring louder than in Algiers, Paris, and Washington. Because the truth is, the Morocco AES deal didn't just challenge ECOWAS's authority, it rewrote the rules of influence across North and West Africa, and those who thought they were the referees are suddenly off the field. Start with Algeria. For years, Algeria positioned itself as a counterweight to Moroccan expansionism in the region. They didn't just compete economically, they competed symbolically. Algeria backed the Polisario Front in Western Sahara, while Morocco claimed the territory. The rivalry runs deep, historical, political, and territorial. Now, enter the AES nations, formerly neutral players, now firmly walking into Morocco's geopolitical tent. This was Algeria's nightmare scenario. 3 sovereign states, once under indirect influence from France or ECOWAS, now cutting trade deals with Rabat. Not because Morocco won them over, but because Algeria offered no viable alternative. No ports, no corridors, no logistics blueprint, only ideology and unresolved feuds. To Algeria, this isn't just a trade deal. It's a strategic loss of terrain in a region it assumed it could sway with soft power and regional security rhetoric. With Morocco taking real steps to connect the Sahel to the sea, Algeria has been pushed to the margins, watching, not shaping, the future. But while Algeria fumes, France is unraveling. For France, the AES-Morocco deal is more than embarrassing. It's existential. For over a century, France's influence in West Africa rested on 3 pillars: security assistance, francophone economic networks, and geographic dependency. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have now burned all 3. They expelled French troops. They rejected the CFA franc and the economic chokehold it created. And now, with Moroccan ports in play, they've dismantled the last pillar: the strategic reliance on French-aligned coastal states for international trade. This deal means France can no longer control what enters or leaves AES borders. It can't delay aid shipments, pause exports, or apply pressure through friendly port states. Its tools are gone. And what France fears most isn't just losing grip on the Sahel, it's watching a new African blueprint emerge without it. One that doesn't involve French contracts, French NGOs, or French soldiers. One where African countries negotiate directly with each other and succeed. This is why the French press called the Morocco deal deeply destabilizing. Not because it threatens regional stability, but because it threatens French hegemony in West Africa. Then there's Washington, where confusion, not panic, is the dominant mood. But confusion can be just as dangerous. The US never truly grasped the depth of anti-French, anti-ECOWAS sentiment brewing in the Sahel. They saw coups and assumed they were just local outbursts, not long-term movements. So when AES walked away from ECOWAS, the US doubled down on diplomatic isolation, sanctions, suspension from trade programs, and even soft threats of aid withdrawal. But now, those strategies are showing cracks. The Morocco AES corridor proves that sanctions no longer mean isolation, that aid threats don't bend knees. African nations can source trade, investment, and military support from alternative partners. Washington didn't plan for this kind of independence. And here's the kicker: Morocco is a US ally. So when Rabat cut this deal with AES, it left Washington in an awkward spot. Criticize Morocco and risk alienating a long-term strategic partner? Or stay silent and watch as its influence in the Sahel continues to erode? The US chose silence. And in that silence, a new order is taking shape. One where African alliances are no longer shaped in Paris, Brussels, or DC. They're being crafted in Rabat, Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey. The West tried to play this like a chess game. Morocco just flipped the board. Now, as the old powers regroup, they face a chilling realization. AES is no longer reacting. It's strategizing. Morocco isn't just building ports, it's building a regional architecture that excludes colonial influence. And the rest of Africa? They're watching closely and taking notes. Because the real fear in Paris, Algiers, and Washington isn't what AES just did. It's who might do it next. Now let's talk about its impact on the whole of Africa. When Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger stood beside Morocco and announced their endorsement of the Atlantic Corridor, the world focused on the obvious: trade routes, maritime access, and foreign policy disruption. But those who understand Africa, truly understand it, know something far more profound happened that day. This wasn't a deal, it was a declaration. For decades, Africa has been handed blueprints written by others. Trade agreements are drafted in Brussels. Security plans were devised in Paris. Development goals were shaped in New York, and every one of them came with the same promise: follow our rules, and you'll prosper. But the people of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have lived through the results. They've seen their gold leave on planes while their children starve. They've watched security convoys protect foreign mines while villages remain defenseless. They've seen railroads lead only to ports that serve Europe's appetite, not Africa's ambition. So when the Morocco AES corridor was signed, what it truly represented was a break in the script. A moment where African nations said, "We're not going to follow your path, we're drawing our map." Because if three of the most vulnerable countries in Africa, landlocked, sanctioned, and politically demonized, can pull this off, what else is possible? Let's not underestimate the scale of what's happening. This corridor is already being described by some analysts as the first African-made trade axis of the 21st century. Designed without Western approval, financed without Bretton Woods institutions, and negotiated without paternalism. It is Africa to Africa, sovereign to sovereign, vision to vision. And now that it's real, the ripple effect has already begun. Other landlocked nations are watching. Chad, Central African Republic, South Sudan, all of them face the same structural obstacles AES faced. For years, they were told to accept their status as dependent buffer zones. But now, those nations are studying the Moroccan model, not as dreamers, but as planners. What if Chad built a pipeline to Moroccan ports through Niger? What if South Sudan negotiated a trade route that bypasses East Africa's volatile politics? What if CAR stopped waiting for international investors and started building rail partnerships with Sahel nations already laying their own? That's not hypothetical. Those discussions have already begun. But it's not just about infrastructure, it's about identity. Because what AES and Morocco did together wasn't just logistical, it was psychological. It proved that you don't need colonial languages to make continental deals. You don't need Western certification to legitimize your leadership. You don't need foreign armies to secure your borders. You just need vision, alignment, and execution. And here's where this becomes a continental doctrine. We are now seeing the early signs of a new African strategy, unwritten but undeniable. Diversify trade routes to end dependency on inherited colonial ports. Forge continental alliances that prioritize sovereignty over Western approval. Invest in logistics and security integration, not just speeches and summits. Defend each other politically, so coups, sanctions, and instability can't be weaponized by outsiders. Frame independence as a collective strategy, not isolated survival. AES has modeled this, Morocco has facilitated it, and the West, despite all its resources, has been left playing catch-up, because they didn't expect Africa to choose itself. And perhaps most revolutionary of all, the people supported it, in Bamako, in Ouagadougou, in Niamey. The streets didn't protest the Morocco deal, they celebrated it. Because this time, it wasn't a foreign corporation extracting resources. It wasn't another partnership that ended in structural adjustment and debt. It wasn't a summit where Africans were invited only to clap politely. This time, Africa set the terms. And that terrifies the old powers. Not just because they're being pushed out, but because they're being replaced with something better, faster, and rooted in dignity. So what's next? AES will build. Morocco will expand. Others will join. And as these new corridors cut across old colonial borders, the real frontier isn't physical, it's mental. It's the moment when a continent, long divided and dictated to, begins to act in unison, not in reaction. This is not a rebellion, it's a renaissance. And it began the day three landlocked nations stopped asking for permission to trade and started sailing toward the future instead. Is Africa still the dependent continent that the world once exploited without consequence? Let us know in the comments section. Is the West ready for the rise of a self-made Africa? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.